the dust of ages. The desert remembers everything, every empire, every whispered prayer, every soul that dared to believe they could conquer time itself. Dr. Eris Thorne knew this. He'd spent 15 years digging through the bones of forgotten civilizations, searching for answers in the silence of sand and stone. But he'd stopped believing in miracles a long time ago. The tomb shouldn't have been there, 300 miles from the nearest archaeological site, buried beneath dunes that shifted like breathing skin. No markers, no legends, just a feeling, a pull that drew his team deeper into the wasteland, following subsurface radar anomalies that made no sense. When they finally broke through the entrance, the air that escaped was cold, not the musty decay of ancient death, but something else, something alive. Dr. Thorne! His assistant's voice trembled in the darkness. You need to see this. The chamber was impossibly pristine, no dust, no erosion. The walls hummed with a frequency just below human hearing, a vibration that settled in the chest like a second heartbeat. And at the center, untouched by time, stood a sarcophagus carved from a single piece of crystalline stone that seemed to capture and hold light from sources that didn't exist. Eris approached slowly, his breath catching. The craftsmanship was beyond anything he'd ever encountered. Symbols flowed across its surface, not carved, but somehow woven into the material itself, shifting subtly when viewed from different angles. His hand trembled as he placed it against the seal. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The symbols blazed with sudden light, white, then blue, then a spectrum that had no name in any human language. The seal didn't break. It dissolved, matter becoming memory, solid becoming shadow. Inside, she lay in perfect stillness, a woman of impossible beauty. Not the idealized proportions of ancient statuary, but something deeper. Features that seemed to capture every culture's definition of grace, yet belonged to none of them. Her skin held the faint luminescence of moonlight on water. Dark hair cascaded around her shoulders like spilled ink. She wore garments that defied identification, fabrics that shimmered between states of matter. But it was her face that stopped Eris's heart, serene, ageless, and utterly devastatingly alone. "Is she preserved?" someone whispered. Eris couldn't answer, because in that moment, as impossible as it seemed, he saw her chest rise, fall, rise again. She was breathing, and then her eyes opened. The first breath she took sounded like thunder, contained in a whisper. Her eyes, vast and depthless as starlit oceans, fixed on Eris, with an intensity that made him forget his own name. The team stumbled backward, equipment clattering. Someone's radio crackled with panic demands for status updates. But Eris stood frozen, caught in a gaze that seemed to see through flesh and bone into the architecture of his soul. When she spoke, the words came in a language that shouldn't exist, ancient beyond ancient, predating Sumerian, predating everything. Yet somehow, impossibly, they understood. How long? Her voice carried harmonics that made the air shimmer, not loud, but present in a way that commanded reality itself to pause and listen. I don't... Eris's scientific mind scrambled for footing. The carbon dating will take weeks, but based on the geological strata, the tomb's age could be 10,000 years. She rose from the sarcophagus with fluid grace, as if gravity was merely a suggestion she chose to acknowledge. Give or take a century, time becomes imprecise in the dark. Dr. Sarah Chen, the team's linguist, found her voice. That's impossible. 10,000 years ago, humans were barely... Humans? The woman's lips curved in something that might have been a smile or might have been sorrow. "Yes, you endure. I'm pleased." She stepped onto the chamber floor, bare feet making no sound. Up close, Iris could see the subtle wrongness in her proportions. Nothing grotesque, just more, as if she existed in slightly more dimensions than the three-dimensional space wanted to accommodate. My name was Lyra. Past tense, Eris noted with a scholar's instinct. I am what you might call a goddess, though we never used that word. We were simply the illuminated, those who carried the light of consciousness to its fullest bloom. A goddess? Eris heard his own skepticism, the scientist in him desperately trying to reassemble the shattered framework of reality. You're claiming to be a deity. Lyra turned to him, and for a moment her composure cracked. Something ancient and infinitely weary moved behind her eyes, a pain so profound that Eris felt it like a physical weight. I'm claiming to be alone. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. The last of my kind. Keeper of a world you will never know, guardian of knowledge that died with those I loved. I am memory made flesh, Dr. Thorne, and memory is the cruelest form of immortality. The chamber temperature continued to drop. Frost began forming on the equipment. Chen's hand shook as she tried to film, the camera's lens fogging repeatedly. This is a hoax, someone muttered. Advanced preservation, some kind of suspended animation. You want proof? Lyra's eyes flashed, and suddenly the symbols on the sarcophagus erupted with light. Not reflected light, generated light, pouring from within the stone itself. The entire chamber, illuminated with constellations that hadn't been visible to human eyes for 10 millennia. Images flooded the walls. Cities of impossible architecture reaching toward skies of different colors. Beings of luminous beauty moving through spaces that bent geometry into new shapes. Technology that looked like art that functioned as science. A civilization so advanced that their ruins had eroded beyond recognition, leaving no trace except this: a final guardian sleeping in the dark, waiting for a world that might be ready to remember. And then silence. The light faded. The walls returned to stone. Eris realized he was crying. He didn't know why. Lyra looked at each team member in turn, seeing their terror, their wonder, their desperate need to categorize what defied categorization. When her gaze returned to Eris, something shifted. A connection, fragile as spider silk, strong as steel, formed in the space between them. You feel it, don't you? She asked softly. The recognition, not of my face, but of something deeper. Your people carry echoes of mine in your DNA, faint signatures of a time when we walked your world as teachers, not gods. You are our children 10,000 generations removed. Eris opened his mouth, closed it. Every scientific principle he'd ever learned screamed that this was impossible. Every instinct he'd spent years suppressing whispered that it was the only truth that mattered. Why, he finally managed, why did you sleep? Why wake now? Lyra's expression became unreadable. Outside the tomb, Eris heard the distant thump of helicopter rotors, the military arriving faster than should have been possible, as if they'd been waiting, as if they'd known. Because, Lyra said, her voice carrying notes of dread, I was not the only one who slept. They set up a makeshift research station in the outer chamber, far enough from Lyra's sarcophagus to feel safe, close enough to maintain the connection that none of them could explain or resist. Lyra sat on an ancient stone bench, looking simultaneously regal and lost. Eris positioned himself across from her, recording device in hand, though he suspected no technology could truly capture what was happening here. "Tell me about your world," he said quietly. "Not a demand, an invitation." Lyra closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they held distant stars. "We called it the resonance, the age when consciousness itself became the primary technology your people build with metal and silicon. We built with thought and will, shaping reality through focused intention and harmonic unity." As she spoke, images began to form, not projected on walls, but manifested in the air between them, ghostly, shimmering, more memory than hologram. Eris watched, transfixed, as an entire civilization unfolded before him, cities that floated on currents of directed gravity, towers grown from living crystal that sang with the voices of those who dwelled within, gardens where plants achieved consciousness and conversed with their tendest transportation that moved through folded space, crossing continents in moments, art that rewrote emotional states, healing trauma with pure aesthetic experience. "We were not perfect," Lyra continued, her voice carrying the weight of confession. "We had eliminated physical suffering, but emotional pain endured. We had conquered death, but not meaninglessness. Some of us, many of us, grew tired of eternity. The universe we discovered was far older and stranger than we'd imagined, and we were not its first enlightened children." The images shifted. Aris saw something vast approaching, a darkness that wasn't merely the absence of light, but the presence of something actively anti-light, a force that consumed not just matter, but meaning itself. "Xylos." Lyra spoke the name like a curse and a prayer. "The void that hungers, an entity, if it can be called that, from before time had direction. It moved through dimensions we could barely perceive, devouring civilizations like yours consumes air, unconsciously, inevitably." Chen leaned forward, camera forgotten. "What did you do?" "We fought." The ghostly images showed war on a scale beyond comprehension, beings of light battling an encroaching darkness, reality itself buckling under the weight of opposed forces. For centuries we fought, and slowly we began to understand we couldn't destroy it. Xylos wasn't alive in any meaningful sense. It was entropy, given will, extinction as a conscious process. "So you ran?" Eris asked. Lyra's laugh was bitter. "We hid. The greatest minds of my people devised the stasis protocol. Thousands of us entered deep sleep in shielded tombs across this world, and others, our life signatures dampened to near nothing, waiting for Xylos to pass, waiting for the universe to cycle into a new age where we might emerge and rebuild." She gestured to the empty chamber around them. "I was meant to wake surrounded by my siblings in consciousness. Instead, I wake to silence, which means either the protocol failed everywhere but here, or I've slept far longer than intended. Long enough for every other tomb to fail. Long enough for your species to evolve from the primitives we once taught to build fire." The weight of that realization settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. "You're saying you're the last," Eris said softly. "Not just of your generation, of your entire species." "I'm saying I'm an orphan of time, Dr. Thorne, the final verse of a song no one remembers hearing." Lyra's composure finally cracked, and Eris saw tears trace down her perfect face, tears that glowed faintly, leaving trails of light on her skin. "I'm saying that everything I loved, everything I was, exists now only in my memory, and memory is a tomb more absolute than stone." Eris acted without thinking. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. The touch should have been nothing. Flesh against flesh. But the moment their skin connected, Eris felt it. A rush of presence, of vast and terrible awareness. For an instant, he perceived as she did. The slow rotation of the earth beneath them, the electromagnetic whispers of the planet's core, the faint songs of distant stars, the intricate dance of quantum probabilities that underlay reality itself, and beneath it all, a profound and aching loneliness that had endured for 10,000 years. Lyra gasped, pulling back, but the connection remained, a thread of shared consciousness neither could quite sever. "You," she whispered, "you felt it. How?" Iris looked at his hand, still tingling. "I don't know. I couldn't let you hurt alone." For the first time since waking, Lyra smiled, a real smile, fragile and genuine. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "there are some things that transcend 10,000 years." Outside, the helicopter rotors grew louder, voices shouted commands. The tomb's entrance flooded with harsh artificial light. The world had found them, and it was not coming with open hands. The soldiers came with guns they didn't understand and orders they couldn't question. Colonel Marcus Webb, sharp-eyed, gray-haired, every inch the career military man, stood at the chamber entrance, flanked by armed personnel and enough scientific equipment to outfit a small research facility. His gaze swept the room, cataloging details with predatory efficiency, before settling on Lyra. "Remarkable," he said, tone flat and clinical. "Preliminary readings are off the scale radiation signatures that don't match any known isotope, electromagnetic fluctuations in the petahertz range, and a humanoid entity claiming to be," he checked a tablet, "a 10,000-year-old goddess." "She's not a threat." Iris stepped forward, positioning himself between Lyra and the soldiers. "She's a refugee, a survivor. She's an unknown variable in possession of potentially world-altering technology." Webb's voice carried the absolute certainty of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Dr. Thorne, you've done excellent work bringing this discovery to our attention, but this is now a matter of global security. The entity will be transferred to a secure facility for analysis." "Analysis?" Chen's voice rose with indignation. "She's a sentient being, not a specimen." "She's an anomaly." Webb gestured, and soldiers moved forward with what looked like modified stun batons crackling with blue energy. "Every government on Earth will want access to what she knows. Every military will want to weaponize what she can do. If we don't secure her now, someone else will. And they'll be far less diplomatic." Lyra rose, her movement causing every soldier to tense. "You would cage me? Interrogate me, I, who taught your ancestors the secret of fire and the first words of language?" "With respect, ma'am." Webb's expression didn't change. "We have only your word for that. And words are cheap." The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the walls in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The symbols on the sarcophagus blazed to life again, but this time they pulsed with a rhythm that felt aggressive, warning. Deep beneath their feet, something resonated, a bass note below human hearing that made teeth ache and hearts stutter. "I did not survive 10,000 years in darkness to be imprisoned by children." Lyra's voice carried harmonics that made reality shiver. Her eyes blazed with inner light, and for the first time, Eris saw what she truly was, not a woman, but a force of nature, wearing a human shape. "I am Lyra of the Luminated. I have walked the surfaces of stars and reshaped matter with thought alone. I am mercy incarnate, for even tolerating this conversation. Webb didn't flinch, but his hand moved to his sidearm. Stand down. Final warning. Colonel, don't! Eris grabbed Webb's arm. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Exactly my point, Doctor. The world exploded into chaos. One soldier, more nervous than the others, fired, not at Lyra. A warning shot into the ceiling, but the moment the bullet left the barrel, it stopped, froze in mid-air, suspended in a bubble of crystallized time. Then it reversed course, embedding itself in the floor with a crack like thunder. Lyra hadn't moved, hadn't gestured. She'd simply decided the bullet wouldn't reach her. Fascinating, she said coldly. Your weapons have improved. The last time humans pointed primitive projectiles at me, they were throwing rocks. More soldiers raised weapons. Webb shouted orders. The chamber descended into a nightmare of shouting voices and crackling energy weapons, and the rising vibration that now shook dust from the ceiling. And then Aris felt it, not through his physical senses, but through that thread of connection Lyra's touch had established, a presence vast and terrible, stirring in the depth below the tomb. Something that had been sleeping, just as Lyra had slept, something drawn by the energy of her awakening like sharks to blood. Lyra, he said urgently, something's coming. She froze, her anger evaporating into pure dread. No, it's too soon. We were supposed to have centuries before. The floor cracked, not a natural earthquake, a rupture, as if something beneath had decided the stone was merely a suggestion. Dark energy, true darkness, not the absence of light, but something actively opposed to it, began seeping through the cracks like oil made of negative space. Every electronic device in the chamber died simultaneously. The soldiers' weapons went dark. Flashlights extinguished. Even the battery-powered recording equipment simply ceased functioning, as if the concept of stored energy had been temporarily revoked. In the sudden darkness, lit only by Lyra's faint luminescence, Webb's voice came out shaky. What is that?" "Xylos," Lyra whispered, "or its echo, a fragment that remained behind, sleeping in the deep places of your world. My awakening must have triggered its revival. The stasis protocol didn't just hide us from it, it hid it from itself." The darkness congealed, taking shape, not a creature but an uncreature, a space where existence faltered. Vaguely humanoid, towering, composed of solidified absence. Where it moved, reality grew thin, showing glimpses of the nothing that underlies everything. A soldier screamed. The sound cut off abruptly as the shadow thing touched him. He didn't die. Death would have been a blessing. He simply stopped. Frozen in a state between life and unlife, expression locked in perpetual terror. Fall back! Webb's training overrode his shock. Retreat, now! But the entrance had sealed itself, stone flowing like water, closing them in. Lyra stepped forward, positioning herself between the advancing darkness and the humans cowering behind her. Light began to build around her, pure, white, reality-affirming light that pushed back against the encroaching void. "I am Lyra," she spoke, and her voice now carried the full weight of what she had been. "I am the last light, and I have not endured eternity to let you snuff out this world's flame." The battle between light and darkness began, and Eris, watching her face it alone, made a choice that would change everything. He stepped forward to stand beside her. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Not letting you fight alone," he said simply. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted, softened, as if in that moment Across all the vast gulf of time and evolution and lost civilizations, she finally saw something familiar, something worth fighting for. "Then hold on," she said, "and whatever you do, don't let go." She took his hand, and the world ignited. The moment their hands joined, Iris understood why gods had been worshipped, not feared, not obeyed, understood. Power flooded through him, not his own, but shared, flowing from Lyra into his limited human frame like an ocean trying to fill a teacup. His nerves ignited. His consciousness expanded. Suddenly, he could feel the tomb around him, every molecule, every quantum vibration. He felt the soldiers' panicked heartbeats, the dying echo of electronic equipment, the malevolent pulse of the shadow creature advancing toward them, and beneath it all he felt her, not just Lyra's presence, but her memory, her history. 10,000 years of consciousness poured into his mind in a cascade that should have shattered his sanity, but instead felt like coming home. He saw her world in its prime, vast cities built from living light, where millions moved in harmonious purpose. He felt their philosophy, not domination of nature, but partnership with it, technology that asked permission rather than taking by force, advancement measured not in conquest, but in deepening consciousness, expanding compassion, achieving ever greater unity between self and other. He saw Lyra as she had been, young by her people's standards, barely 3,000 years old, a teacher who specialized in helping lesser species take their first steps toward enlightenment. She had loved that work, had traveled to 100 worlds, nurturing civilizations, planting seeds of consciousness that would bloom over millennia. Earth had been one of her gardens. She'd walked among early humans, teaching them agriculture, language, the first principles of mathematics and medicine, not as a god, but as an elder sister, patient and kind. She'd laughed with them, mourned their dead, celebrated their breakthroughs. She'd watched Homo sapiens take their stumbling first steps toward full consciousness, and had been proud. Then came Xylos. Iris felt her terror as the void that hungers approached their dimension, felt her desperation as every defense failed, every weapon proved useless against something that existed in opposition to existence itself, felt her anguish as, one by one, her people made the choice to enter stasis, believing they would wake to a renewed universe. Felt her isolation when she woke, reached out with her consciousness, and found nothing. No response, no siblings in sleep, just silence stretching across every world they'd seeded. She'd been alone for 10,000 years in that tomb, not sleeping peacefully, but aware conscious in the darkness, waiting, hoping, slowly accepting that she might be the last. "I'm so sorry," Eris gasped, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry you had to endure that." "Don't apologize." Lyra's voice echoed both aloud and directly in his mind. "You're the first being in 10 millennia who's tried to understand rather than use me. That alone is worth—" The shadow creature struck. It moved faster than thought, an absence lunging through space. Lyra raised their joined hands, and light erupted. Pure, coherent consciousness, a spear of affirmation against negation. The two forces collided with a sound like reality tearing. "It's too strong," Lyra said through gritted teeth. "This fragment is more intact than I thought. It's fed on the background fear and desperation of your world for centuries, growing while it slept." "Then use me," Eris said. "You said we share DNA. You said we're echoes of your people. So use me. I give you permission." "Eris, no. The energy required would burn you out, destroy your nervous system. I don't care. He squeezed her hand tighter, and through their connection pushed not power. He had none, but something else. Belief, faith, not in her divinity, but in her right to exist, in the value of memory, in the desperate, defiant hope that consciousness, once kindled, should never be extinguished.